Hello everyone, Biology for Grade 10. Today we're going to talk about the organisms and their environment, starting with the food chain and the food web. As for a food chain, what is a food chain? The food chain here is more likely as a sequence or a chart that shows the flow of energy from one organism to another and always starts with a producer, which mainly are plants in general. For an example here, we've got the mahogany tree. It's going to be eaten by a caterpillar, and the caterpillar is going to be eaten by a songbird, and the hawk is going to feed on the songbird. So the energy here has transformed from the tree by its own, making its own food. That's why they are called producers, because they actually make their own food. The energy here is transferred to the next organism that ate the mahogany tree, which happens to be a caterpillar. The caterpillar is getting to be eaten by a songbird, and therefore the energy has transferred from the caterpillar to the songbird, and finally the songbird is getting to be it's going to be eaten by the hawk. So the final energy here transferred to the hawk. The food web showing the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, beginning with the producer. The energy transferred between organisms is by ingestion. The producer is always an organism that makes its own organic nutrients, usually using energy from sunlight through photosynthesis, and this is what we said before, because mainly they are plants, and plants make their own food by photosynthesis, using the sunlight, of course. And the consumer is the organism that gets its energy by feeding on other organisms. Could be animals, other microorganisms, so practically only the plants are producers. A herbivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating plants, and carnivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating another animal. The decomposer is an organism that gets its energy from dead or waste organic matter. And as an overall, the ecosystem is a unit containing all the organisms and their environment interacting together. Like, for an example, if I'm going to talk about an area specifically decomposing log or a lake, the trophic level is a position of an organism in a food chain or a food web or a pyramid of biomass or numbers of energy. Like we said, we've got primary consumers that they eat veggies, secondary consumer that they eat meat or drink milk, tertiary, the third level of consumers, they eat predatory fish or salmon. Okay, the food chains usually have The food chains usually have fewer than 5 tropical levels because energy transfer is inefficient. So it's just like max 4. The sun produces light, that means less than 1% of the energy falls onto the leaves. Producers fix only from 5 to 8% of that energy because of transmission, reflection, and incorrect wavelength. The primary consumer only gets between 5 to 10% because some parts are indigestible, like for example cellulose, and not eating the whole plant. The secondary consumer gets between 10 to 20 because animal matter is more digestible and has higher energy. And each level heat is lost by respiration. This is an important point. At each level heat is actually lost by respiration. Humans eating plants is more efficient than humans eating animals because we need only a couple of vegetables to have one meal, but to have meat, we must feed the animal a lot of plant material in order to get far less meat. In the process of raising an animal, plants lose energy to environment. Then animal actually loses energy to the environment and does not use all of the plant material. So it's practically inefficient and not enough. Here we've got the pyramid of numbers and the pyramid of biomass. For an example, here we've got the human at the top, then cows, and the cows are eating the corn. As for the pyramid of biomass, for an example, owl, feeds on a shrew, the shrew feeds on a caterpillar, the caterpillar feeds on the oak tree. So as for the pyramid of numbers, show number of each organism in a food chain. When moving up, the pyramid here decreases. For the pyramid who shows the biomass, the number of individuals multiplied by their individual mass. Then we move on to the carbon cycle. I'm pretty much sure that the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and the nitrogen cycle, you are much familiar with it, and practically we've done this before. The population. The population here, when I'm going to say, like, for an example, the population of China is massive. What do I mean by a population? The group of organisms of one species living in the same area at the same time. Like, for an example, I'm talking about human beings. So I would practically say that the number of people in China is way much more than the number of people, for an example, in Slovenia. So a population here is a group of organisms of one species, the same, living at the same area at the same time. Meanwhile, the difference between population and community, the community here is like all of the populations of different species in an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is a unit containing the community of organisms and their environment interacting together. The factors that affect the rate of population, for an example, growth. Like if I want to talk about like any sort of a country and the rate of population, like does it increase, does it decrease, what happens there? One of the things is actually if it's a place or country that doesn't have much resources, and practically not all of them, they survive at a range of a specific age. Like probably like the kids, like I would find out that a community or a population, if I'm going to do some statistics, I will find out that people ranging from the age of 20 to 50 won't even make 10% of the population. Or those kids, or let's do it like children the age of from newborns till 15 won't make like 20%. So this is a major thing to take in consideration. Like what is it? Why I'd have such a minimum percent of children from this range. Probably go through the food supply, a disease if it's like a contaminated area or a place that is like highly risk and they don't have like the sufficient medical performance or association or anything. So practically you will find out that people tend to die more than those who actually can be born and survive. The food supply, quantity and quality. For example, snails need calcium to reproduce, to make a shell. Predation. If a predator population falls, the prey population will rise. And as for the disease, causes organisms to die. So high death rate partly cancels out the birth rate, meaning that means I have less population growth, especially if the organism dies before giving birth or even population decline. So sometimes I will have like many women, they fail to give birth to their children in a healthy state, or at least, or let's say like they fail in the major process of actually giving birth because there is no equipment that or any sort of health circumstance to actually make sure that this woman would actually give birth in a proper way, or at least for its own sake and health and the health of the baby. So practically I will have like a slight decrease, or if sometimes like it happens to be a major fall in the population number. Okay, now we come to the last chapter with the human influence on ecosystem. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the food supply. Food production has increased because improved machinery, that means less labor is needed because we're actually relying on the machines. Fertilizers help help the crops to grow better, and I will have like improved ones and widespread ones. And insecticides as a type of pesticide that actually kills insect, and herbicides as a type of pesticide that kills the weeds. Sometimes like I'm actually planting some plants and or crops or anything, and I just have those kind of weeds that actually tend to damage whatever I planted. So I would just spray a herbicide, which is a pesticide that actually kills weeds, and make sure that my crops actually grow in a proper environment. There is something else called the artificial selection and genetic.